thing. For the next half an hour, live on LBC and also live for you to watch on Global Player as well, we are joined by Eylon Levy, a spokesperson for Israel's government, who is here to answer questions that you have about the conflict, about the conduct of the conflict, about the future for Palestine, the future for Israel. Any question you wish to ask a representative of Mr. Netanyahu's government, get your calls in now. 0345 6060 973. Mr. Levy, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. It's good to see you. Just before we get to the first call, let me ask you about the logistics of what we are seeing this afternoon. The hostages that have been released are, I think, now across the Rafah crossing into Egypt. Is that your understanding?
Yes, we're dealing with a very sensitive situation. Of course, the release of women and children who've been held for nearly 50 days now in some dark tunnel, and their families have been held in the dark as well. We don't know their condition, the condition that they've been held in. Many of the hostages in the Gaza Strip, we don't know whether they're even alive because Hamas has been denying them basic access to the Red Cross. And perhaps even more heartbreaking, these people who are being released today don't know what happened to their families on October 7th, including those children. They don't know that their families were massacred, that their homes were burned down. And when we get them into Israel and reunite them with what's left of their families, we're going to begin a very long process of rehabilitation and healing for kids who have literally been in the bowels of hell.
And when will that happen? When will those hostages come out of Egypt and into Israel?
This is an ongoing process at the moment. They are on the move. I hope that we can bring them into Israeli territory as soon as possible, and then we can also announce the names of those who have been rescued. They'll be transported by soldiers who have been specially trained to be sensitive with them, not to touch them if they don't want, to ask for permission. You understand these children are going to be deeply, deeply traumatized, and hopefully we can reunite them with what's left of their families.
We'll keep watching that, certainly as you're on with us this afternoon, to see if there are any further changes. 0345 6060 973 is the number. Let's come straight to your calls. Hamish is in Tottenham. Hamish, you're on with Mr. Levy. Your question.
Hi there. I wanted to ask about Palestinians that are held imprisoned in Israel's prison system. So thousands of Palestinians are detained each year without charge. Many of them are children. Many of those released today, I understand, are children and kept in conditions that research from Save the Children has said are torturous, without legal access to lawyers, beaten, and held in solitary confinement. How is that acceptable?
The prisoners we are releasing as part of this deal to get our hostages back have, for the most part, been convicted of violent offences. We're not releasing anyone who has been convicted of murder, but we are unfortunately releasing people, including 16-year-olds, including 17-year-olds, who have been convicted of attempted murder. We're talking about stabbing attacks, shooting attacks, attempted bombings against civilians, against police officers, and it brings no one in Israel any comfort that these dangerous people are about to be released, but Hamas is holding our children. It abducted them on October 7th, and this is a price that we are having to pay in order to get them out. We're talking about people, again, who have been convicted of terrorism offences, violent crimes, attempted murder. The fact that they are not in jail for murder
there was
is
some
not
suggestion
for
that
want of
people are being
trying.
convicted for throwing stones.
In many cases, throwing stones can be very dangerous. You have many people driving in cars, civilians driving in cars. A stone that goes through your windshield, whether you are driving in Jerusalem or driving in Tottenham, can kill you. So that is a very dangerous offense. But many of the people, and that list, by the way, of the Palestinian prisoners Israel is releasing is publicly available. You can see the news reports about them as well. We're talking about dangerous people, and we're having to release these people in exchange for the innocent children who were abducted from their beds.
Why, before October the 7th, had Israel imprisoned more Palestinians than at any point in the last 20 years?
Well, over the last year, we have seen, unfortunately, a dramatic upswing in terrorism emanating from the West Bank. More Israelis had been killed in terror attacks this year than in the preceding period. We know that on October 7th, Hamas tried to escalate this conflict by telling Palestinians in the West Bank to grab knives, grab guns, and join in the massacre of October 7th. They're still trying to drag Hezbollah into the war in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. So we're doing the best we can to try to contain this conflict, to make sure that it doesn't escalate and it doesn't go further or any more widely. But unfortunately, we do have a very serious problem that within Palestinian society, not only in the Gaza Strip, but also the West Bank, attacks against civilians, violent attacks against civilians, are viewed appallingly as a legitimate form of resistance.
Let me come back to
Hamish.
Hamish.
Condemned as terrorism.
Hamish, your view of the answer.
Yeah. Obviously, any attacks on civilians from Palestinians or otherwise are abhorrent and not acceptable. I'm specifically referring to people who are detained without charge. I believe Israel introduced a law where they can detain people based on secret evidence, and I don't know who on earth that is accountable to. But I'm talking about thousands of people held without charge, not convicted of attempted murder, people who are held in solitary confinement, children who are held in solitary confinement without access to lawyers, beaten, tortured. I'm talking about those prisoners.
And that's happening, Mr. Levy.
First of all, Israel does not commit torture, period. The people we're talking about, in some cases, there is a process of detention. That is subject to a process of judicial review and must be approved by a judge. In some cases, people are apprehended based on sensitive intelligence that cannot be revealed in a courtroom. But we are dealing with people who are implicated in violent crimes against civilians, in violent crimes against police officers. And now, as we get our hostages back from the Gaza Strip, we have agreed to release a number of very dangerous individuals in order to get those hostages back. And we know that there can be no comparison and no symmetry, as some people, I think, are trying to draw between the innocent children who were abducted by Hamas and the prisoners we are releasing, who in many cases tried to murder children.
Okay. Hamish, thank you for the call. Dana's in Chigwell. Hi, Dana.
Hi, hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes. Hi, Eylon, Nimrod. I have actually two questions. Well, first of all, if I may say, this is some sort of relief in this mad last 50 days, and I'm very excited to speak with you now as hopefully our 12 citizens are making their way back into security and comfort, and hopefully the rest will follow very soon. I have two questions for you. One is, what are your estimations about the risk of the ceasefire to stop Israel from actually reaching the target of ending Hamas in this war? Do you think that the ceasefire will be a hurdle to overcome if we needed to reaction the war? And I have a second question for you, and it's about your interview yesterday with Sky News. And but if you would rather,
let's start on the first, Dana. Let's go for the first
Dana,
question.
Thanks for your question. Israel has two goals in response to the October 7th massacre, that awful day when Hamas death squads invaded Israel and burned whole families alive, beheaded people, raped little girls, tortured children in front of their parents. Our response to that is twofold. First, we plan to destroy Hamas's terrorist and governing capabilities in the Gaza Strip so it can never hurt our people again. This war will end with the end of Hamas, or else it will end with Hamas emboldened to commit more attacks against our people, as it is promising to do.
What does ending Hamas, of inaction? What does that mean? What does that look like? How can you describe the parameters by which Israel will say, yes, we have now ended Hamas?
It means destroying all of Hamas's infrastructure, all of its rockets, all of its tunnels, going after all of its commanders, all of its terrorists, so that Hamas no longer governs the Gaza Strip. In a similar way, by the way, to how a decade ago, 86 nations, including the United Kingdom, ganged up on ISIS in order to deny it its territorial control in Syria and Iraq. No one thought that the UK was going to eliminate Islamic extremism. That wasn't the goal or the idea of ISIS. But there was a terrorist group that was using territory in order to perpetrate attacks against people all over the world. And 86 nations came together to say a terrorist group that perpetrates such crimes against humanity cannot be allowed to hold territory. And we plan to do the same to Hamas in Gaza and remove it from power.
And the second thing... Sorry to interrupt. That happens even if the 240 hostages that Hamas hold, even if they have been released.
Absolutely, because we will not go back to 6 a.m. on October 7th. We simply, as a country, cannot go back to a world in which an army of terror, literally meters away from people's homes, can invade at will and abduct babies from their beds. We cannot go back to that world. And the sad thing is that after Hamas committed that awful massacre on October 7th, the deadliest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, the deadliest terror attack in world history after 9/11, and they retreated into the Gaza Strip with 240 hostages, including 30 children. Hamas immediately said that it wanted to do it again. Over and over again in interviews, it has said we want to do October 7th massacres again and again and again. And that's why this war has to end with the end of Hamas, or it will do it again and it will feel emboldened.
Is it not, very sadly, tragically, horrifically, a colossal failure of the Israeli state to have seen people, to use your words, invade at will from Gaza into Israel? That is a colossal security failing.
Without a doubt, the October 7th massacre was a terrible fiasco. No doubt. We are still reeling, and I tell you, everyone in Israel, for us, the date is still October 7th. I know the news cycle has moved on abroad. As long as we have those hostages in Gaza, we still have body bags of unidentifiable human remains. We are still living in October 7th. Absolutely, it was a terrible, terrible disaster. And when this war is over, when it ends with an Israeli victory, we are going to interrogate it down to the smallest detail and understand exactly how we make sure that never happens again.
Donna, thank you for your call. Jay's in Willesden. Hi, Jay.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just had a quick question around what your guest thinks about the Palestinians' right to self-defense in the illegally occupied territories in the West Bank and what that looks like in practical terms. So obviously, your guest will say that Israel has the right to defend itself and as a result has bombed women and children. Do Palestinians in the West Bank have that same right to self-defense to rid themselves of illegal occupiers? And also, I just had a second question, if I may, so a very quick one. What does your guest think about why there are so many Israelis and Jews and Israeli Jews that are fiercely, fiercely opposed to Israel's illegal occupation, the apartheid and the oppression? Just to give a few names: Norman Finkelstein, Abraham Shalom, the late Gerald Kaufman, Ilian Pab. These are academic historians, politicians.
Thank you. Run through the names, Jay. I only move on for time reasons only. I think you've got your questions in. Mr. Levy.
First of all, it is, of course, a sad fact of history that on many occasions when there was talk of peace talks, possible progress on that front towards a negotiated political settlement, we saw Palestinian terrorism that scuppered it. Let's remember it was in the early 1990s, during the heyday of the Oslo Accords, that Hamas launched its campaign of suicide bombings across the country, including in Tel Aviv, in order to scupper that deal. In 2000, Israel offered the Palestinians a very, very generous settlement of almost all of the West Bank for an independent state. And not only did Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestinian Authority at the time, reject that, the response was another wave of suicide bombings in Israeli malls, cafes, restaurants around the country. That was called the Intifada,
So
by the way. When you hear,
that doesn't explain, does it, the illegal settlements of Israelis in the West Bank?
Well, the question was about the right to self-defense, and we're explaining that when we come under attack with such brutal atrocities, people targeting our civilians...
And I think Jay's question was does that work both ways?
Well, the answer is that Israel has, on more than enough occasions, proven that when there is a serious partner for peace on the other side, we are willing to make very far-reaching concessions. Let me give you an example that is pertinent to where we are now. Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005. Israel pulled out. We gave the keys to the Gaza Strip to the Palestinians nearly 20 years ago. We pulled out 8,000 settlers. It was very controversial and painful in Israeli society. We pulled out the army, and we were convinced that we were starting a path towards a more peaceful future, and that if we were ever attacked from the Gaza Strip, we would have complete international legitimacy in order to defend ourselves, because we had just vacated that territory. And in response, that territory was taken over by Hamas, a vile terror organization.
There was a coup in the Gaza Strip to put Hamas in control, absolutely. But I'm afraid it still hasn't answered the question, following those elections, but it still hasn't answered the question of why it is Israelis under the Netanyahu administration are seemingly allowed to create illegal settlements in the West Bank. These are settlements that are illegal under international law and for which the UN has expressed concern towards Israel. What is the justification for that?
First of all, we dispute that legal assessment. And when you're talking to me about the United Nations, this being the same United Nations that has not condemned Hamas for the atrocities of October 7th, this being the same the same United Nations that has not demanded the return of the hostages, this being the same United Nations that when Israel captured Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann in Argentina, decided to condemn Israel for capturing a Nazi war criminal, we do not think that is a body with the moral authority to tell us
but
how
the
we
UN
are
doesn't
supposed
make
to
the
deal
law
with
on
people.
these things. So what your dispute is a legal dispute that without having it ironed out one way or the other, Israelis are still mounting settlements in the West Bank.
We dispute the legal assessment that says that the homes that are being built in land that Israel captured from Jordan in 1967 are illegal under international law. We firmly dispute that.
Rahul is in Croydon. Hi, Rahul.
Hiya.
Your question.
I have a question. My question for your guest is, how are we meant to believe the integrity of any statements coming out of the Israeli government when they've murdered journalists before and said that they haven't, and then yet been caught afterwards? They've been caught editing photos or pictures and then deny it afterwards. There's so many fake stories coming out, but every time we are told that Hamas is the ones not to believe, whether it's the death count or anything else, but we are told this on the basis that Hamas is unreliable. Many people would say the Israeli government statements are just as unreliable. So, number one, how are we meant to believe any accusations or defences that they offer? And also, is there a difference between an Israeli baby and a Palestinian baby, and perhaps being killed by a knife or a drone? Because in both cases, for me, as I'm sure for most people, they are equal. And being killed remotely from a drone or, on October the 7th, is still the death of an innocent child.
Let's come back to that in just a moment. Let's stay on the first question about trust, Mr. Levy, about how people can trust what it is you are saying is fact.
First of all, I'm not familiar with the specific allegations that you are mentioning, but I'll give you an example about the information warfare. I want to give you an example about the information warfare that we have seen so you can draw conclusions for yourself. Over a month ago, Hamas made up a story about an Israeli airstrike on a hospital that killed 800 people. That story ran all the way around the world, parroted by international media outlets that I regret to say were acting very irresponsibly by parroting a press release from an organization that only 2 weeks earlier had abducted, burned, and beheaded children, and then lied about it. Now, it took Israel a few hours to check the facts. We could have immediately put out a denial. But we are a democratic state with a professional army, and it is important for us to check the facts. And when we checked the facts, it turned out that it had in fact been the shrapnel of an Islamic Jihad rocket that had misfired inside the Gaza Strip, one of 1,000 rockets fired by Palestinian terrorists that have misfired and killed Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. It hadn't destroyed a hospital. It had fallen in the parking lot, and far fewer people, according to Western intelligence estimates, had been killed than Hamas claimed in the first place.
Rahul's problem is not that you put out that story. It's that he can believe what it is you're putting out. So he doesn't trust you enough to present your intelligence services evidence as evidence.
First of all, I think it's very sad if you don't trust us, and we're doing as much as we can. Here I am appearing on LBC trying to answer your questions so that you can believe what we are saying and the truth we are presenting, because these aren't just claims. Take, for example, the question of the tunnels under the Shifa hospital. For the last month, Israel has been saying that Hamas has used the basement of the Shifa hospital as a command and control center. And we have been mocked and ridiculed by international agencies and networks with a vested interest in denying that Hamas was using that basement. And now the concrete evidence, the literally concrete evidence, is there for everyone to see. We've released the photographic and the video evidence. We've taken journalists inside. I hope the international media can go as well. And we have proven that what we have been saying for a month, that so many people were skeptical about because they didn't want to believe that Hamas, yes, the same Hamas that perpetrated the October 7th massacre, that Hamas could use the basement of a hospital as a command center in violation of humanitarian law. They didn't want to believe it.
So
and
the
we've
IDF,
proved it by showing the evidence.
The IDF declared that to justify attacks on or bombings around the Al-Shifa hospital, quotes that they were the main headquarters for Hamas's terrorist activity. Does the evidence you've shown of what has been going on in the Al-Shifa suggest that it is the main headquarters of Hamas's terrorist activity?
Let's recap the evidence that we have shown. It's not only the piles of RPGs, far more than you would find at the Royal Free Hospital in London, I think. we uncovered a tunnel shaft 10 meters underground. That's like 2 double-decker buses, leading to a 55-meter-long tunnel leading to a blast door with a firing hole. We managed to breach through that, and we have in fact put out a video, and media have gone inside, showing a whole warren of tunnels under that hospital. Now let's explain what that meant. It meant that Hamas terrorists could go outside, shoot rockets at Israel, and then retreat safe underneath the hospital, knowing that they could not be attacked because there were women and children and sick people above them. That was a sick and twisted abuse of what is supposed to be a humanitarian facility. Under international law, hospitals must be protected. They must never be abused as headquarters for military activity or for any military activity whatsoever, and we are outraged. We are outraged that Hamas has nullified those hospitals' protected status by abusing them for military purposes. And I hope and I expect that in the days and weeks to come, we are going to show the whole tunnel system under the hospital. It's going to take time. I know some people were expecting a Wizard of Oz moment where we would pull back a curtain and say ta-da, but we're talking about a large area of crisscrossing tunnels that has been heavily booby-trapped. It's going to take time to clear it out. And I think when we expose the full extent, and we've shown a lot of it, I think a lot of international agencies, the United Nations, etc., are going to have to ask some very, very difficult questions, answer those questions about what they knew, how it is possible that they said nothing, and why, as this evidence comes to light, they continue to cover up for Hamas. I'll remind you, the World Health Organization, this is astonishing, has yet to condemn Hamas for putting military facilities underneath hospitals. You know, it's hilarious if you think about it. They actually sent a team to run a risk assessment at the hospital over the weekend and didn't once mention that there were IDF soldiers outside literally at the same time digging up evidence of Hamas tunnels, and that those tunnels and that hospital had been used to abduct hostages.
I do want to come to Rahul's the second part of his question in just a moment. Just bring you some breaking news. The Red Cross has confirmed that 24 hostages have been released. I'm seeing the latest images of those hostages being driven in Red Cross jeeps through, I presume, a part of Egypt where those cars are being surrounded, pictures are being taken. There seems to be clapping and celebration. We'll come back to those images and the developments in the hostage release in just a moment. Question from me, if I may, on the conduct of the war thus far. What international law allows Israel to deprive an entire population of water and electricity?
No international law would allow that, but we have also not done that. Israel supplies 2 water lines into Gaza. One of those water lines, by the way, came under attack from Hamas from a mortar, and we had to fix it under fire. We're continuing to supply water, and our obligations under international law are to facilitate the provision of life-saving humanitarian aid necessary for the civilian population. We have been doing that, and we want to see as much food, water,
so you're saying that we didn't cut
shelter.
off the entire population from water and electricity?
Absolutely not. On October 7th, Hamas fired, I think, over 3,000 rockets in the space of a few hours that took down the electricity grid that was providing electricity from Israel to the Gaza Strip. But since you mentioned humanitarian law, Tom, because you mentioned humanitarian law.
I know what you're going to go into about hospitals. I understand that. But when Israeli ministers,
no, it's a different point, Tom.
Let me ask you
it's a different point.
Let me ask you about.
You asked me about international law, and I would like to explain it.
The fear that people have about what it is that Israel is really seeking to do. An Israeli minister within the government said that one of the options that the Israeli military had would be to drop a nuclear bomb on the Gaza Strip. You can see, I presume, with comments like that, why people are worried about, scared of, what it is Israel could do.
First of all, that was a daft statement, and the Prime Minister said immediately that it has absolutely no connection to reality. But as for the question of humanitarian law, because I think it's important, and we take international law very seriously, we know our obligations and we know our rights, Hamas is a territory controlled by a terror organization openly sworn to the destruction of our country. There is no requirement in international law for a state that has been attacked in a war to continue supplying enemy territory with electricity or fuel. That does not exist in international law. In fact, there is no precedent.
But not all Gazans are enemies, are they? Or are they?
No, but under international law, you mentioned international law, there is no obligation for a country that has come under attack by enemy-held territory to provide the fuel that is then being put into rockets to be fired and to hit our people. So we're committed to allowing the provision of humanitarian aid through Egypt. That is going through. There are no limitations on our part. We've more than doubled our capacity to inspect the humanitarian aid. That's entering through Egypt, and it's important that that humanitarian aid reach the civilians who need it in a way that ensures that Hamas cannot steal it.
Let me come to another call before we finish. I know we haven't got long with you. Shahada is in Beckenham. Shahada, your question.
I just want to say, Leva, you've stated question of reality. The reality is the beheading, the rape has been debunked by Haaretz, BBC, CNN. That is the truth. That you are spreading your lie. Haaretz newspaper has even stated Apache helicopters killed their own civilians. That is a fact. Anybody here watching, look it up. The question of reality, Israel is illegally occupied. It did not start in October the 7th. People are researching
Shahada, what's your question?
They're understanding history context.
Shahada, what's your question, please?
Please get to the question.
My question is, do you validate your stories? And so why are newspapers debunking your stories?
Mr. Levy.
Tom, you've watched that video of the 43 minutes of Hamas atrocities captured on CCTV and GoPros, haven't you?
I have.
What have you seen?
I've seen the beheading of people by Hamas. I saw the beheading of a soldier by Hamas with the face of the soldier unpixelated. And the entire video is the most brutal, horrific thing I have ever witnessed. I think Shahada's point is the story about the 40 beheaded babies. Is that still a story that has any truth to it when I think the Biden administration certainly has resiled from it?
Tom, the sad truth is children were beheaded on October 7th. And we have that from multiple eyewitnesses. The heads of 2 civilian rescue services and the military rescue services who say we literally carried beheaded children with our own hands. But apart from that, you saw in that video the photos of the burned babies, not only the burned adults. I saw that video. I had to ask for it to be stopped at one point because it looked like there was simply a lump of coal on the screen, and that was someone's baby. Those were the atrocities that Hamas perpetrated on October 7th. Those were the atrocities that people celebrated around the world on October 7th, as if this was some sort of glorious act of resistance. And any attempt to deny the evidence, including the evidence that Hamas filmed on its own GoPros because it is proud of that violence, is peddling Holocaust denial-like lies about the atrocities of Hamas, I think by people who are struggling to believe that their heroes are capable of such horrific crimes against humanity. And it is those crimes against humanity that we are defending ourselves.
Tell Shahada that.
Shahada, I think you should be ashamed of yourself for denying the atrocities of October 7th.
What about targeted burned Palestinian babies? Why are we not talking about that?
I think you should be ashamed of yourself. I think you should be ashamed of yourself.
Can I just speak for a minute, please? Palestinians are just referred to as collateral damage. That's what they refer to. And with that same logic, one could argue Israelis are collateral damage. Why not? If we talk about equality, that's war. That's what we're told. It's a cloud of war. Yet one person is collateral damage and the other person is an innocent civilian. You're denying international law. You're not above the law. And that's why millions of us are going to protest tomorrow around the world. Millions of us.
But Shahada, you agree that the terrorism committed by Hamas, you agree that needs a response from Israel?
That's wrong. It's not a proportional response. Who can say that's proportional? Killing civilians, women and children, starving them of water, gas and electricity. That is inhumane.
Mr. Levy.
Shahada, you've covered a lot of ground with that Holocaust denial-like lies where you denied the atrocity that Hamas committed on October 7th. Then I think try to take it in a different direction. Well, she absolutely did with those stories she was saying that it was made up. Look, what happened on October 7th was that Hamas deliberately targeted civilians in an act of systematic extermination. Its death squads invaded Israel, hunting civilians to kill. They committed acts of mass rape. They burned whole families. In one home, a rescuer said that the father had his eyes gouged out, the mother had her breast chopped off, the little girl had her fingers cut off, and then a little boy had his foot cut off, and then the terrorists sat down to have dinner, to have lunch around their table. They burned people, they beheaded people, they tortured them, and they systematically targeted civilians. And in response to that, we are systematically targeting the Hamas terrorists who did that. We are targeting the monsters who perpetrated the deadliest and most sadistic massacre of Jews.
Would the manner in which this is being done by Israel,
and I'm explaining,
would
and
that
we are doing
change?
everything we can to get civilians out of harm's way. Unfortunately, that is very difficult, because Hamas's strategy over the last 16 years has been to embed itself in civilian areas. We've found tunnel shafts underneath children's beds, rockets factories inside mosques, a command center underneath a hospital. And that's why we spent a month going blue in the face, urging civilians to evacuate. It's why we operated humanitarian corridors, with our own soldiers getting attacked with RPGs by Hamas, trying to get civilians out of harm's way, because we do not want them to be hurt. Okay. Civilian casualties, if I can finish this point, are a tragic feature of every war. And unfortunately, they are a tragic feature of this war that Hamas declared on us with the October 7th massacre, and this war that we are going to win and that we're going to end. And we're going to end in a way that brings security for the people of Israel and new opportunities for Palestinians who understand that terrorism is always a dead end.
I'm really, really grateful to you coming on this afternoon. I hope that we can do this again, given clearly there are a lot of people who would like to speak to you. I know, Mr. Levy, that you are an LBC fan yourself. So I hope that we could perhaps use that to persuade you to come on again, because I hope for a lot of people it has been enlightening, interesting and thought-provoking. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Spokesperson for the Israeli government. You're listening to Tom Swarbrick on LBC. It's 4:34. Coming up, your response. News headlines now. Amelia Cox.
An Israeli spokesperson for the government has told LBC the country is still living the horrors of October 7th. Eylon Levy says they still have no idea what condition hostages who have been released by Hamas are in. The Red Cross says 24 people have been freed and have been transported from Gaza to the Rafah border. 10 of those are Thai nationals and another is a Filipino citizen. And Oscar Pistorius has been granted parole more than 10 years after shooting his girlfriend Reba Steenkamp on Valentine's Day 2013. The Olympic runner will be released from prison in January with strict conditions. LBC weather: a dry, clear and cold night across much of the UK. A few showers in the far north of Scotland and along North Sea coasts. A low of -4 degrees.
This is LBC.
Where will the EasyJet Holidays Black Friday sale take you? Beach with the kids? City break with the girls? 4-star hotel? 5-star hotel? Or all of the above? Get up to £200 off package holidays with just a £60 per person deposit. Search EasyJet Holidays. Selected date. Sale ends 11 p.m. the 27th of November 2023. Holidays minimum spend required. ATOL protected. T's and C's apply.
If you're a fairy like me, you'll love the new M&S Light Up Christmas tins because they're shaped like little houses and trees that actually light up. Perfect for my fairy Christmas parties. But look, don't worry if you're a human being. You'll love them too because they're filled with irresistible Scottish shortbread, chocolate chip cookies, Swiss chocolate truffles, hot chocolate or luxury gold tea. These are not just tins. No, these are M&S Light Up Christmas tins.